So, Deltarune chapters 3 and 4 are inching closer and closer, and with the release day of Deltarune announced to be one day earlier than originally planned for those not living in Japan, it seems like so many creators have started building hype around the game. Many theories about what is to come being made every couple days, and considering there are plenty of things that we can speculate about before the official release, and since I have my voice back, I decided it would be a good time to make a theory of my own, one that has many answers about one of the most mysterious and cryptic characters in all of Deltarune, and why Ralsei seems to have a mysterious power to travel wherever he wants. But before we begin, let me just say thank you all so much for getting the channel to 2,000 subscribers. Glad to have you all here at Epoch, your favorite place for everything indie game related, and let's talk about why Deltarune's doors are more important than you might realize. Before we get started, please keep in mind that anything I present is just a theory to explain things that occur in game, and any theories that I disregard are purely because they don't fit with the theory I have crafted, and it is not because I think they are incorrect, rather they don't fit into the picture I have pieced together. I do like many of the theories that I choose not to use as evidence, so don't take this as a debunk, rather as an alternative explanation for a lot of the things I will bring up. If you dislike the explanation that I have created, feel free to share your own theories and give respectful criticism. With that being said, let's talk about Deltarune's unique fascination with doors. Now, you may be wondering why any of this is important in the first place, and also what doors have to do with Ralsei. Considering there hasn't been any major darkeners that are door themed, there hasn't been a whole lot of major places that have doors, although there are a couple, and there isn't much of a correlation between doors and a Dark World prince at first glance. But in order to explain it, let's go over a few examples of prominent doors in Deltarune. A good place to start is the significance of double doors. The Dark Worlds that we have gone into so far have each been behind double doors, the first example being the double doors that lead to the supply closet in the school, and the second example being the double doors that lead to the computer lab in the library. These seem to be the common entrance to Dark Worlds as a whole, but these double doors aren't the only significant doors in Deltarune. In fact, there are some other notable examples that are actually just as important, such as the Great Door separating Castletown from the Card Kingdom. When playing through Chapter 1, after first entering the Dark World, you will stumble upon Susie, then get chased to Castletown, where you will meet Ralsei for the first time. And after a battle with Lancer, you will come across this large ornate door, one that Ralsei notes is not supposed to be open, and when you go through, Ralsei will close the door behind both of you. Now, in the Light World, we know this door is the one that separates the closet from the abandoned classroom, and it seems like it is pretty important that this door stays shut, otherwise Ralsei would have been okay with it being left open. But there is another important example of doors in Deltarune that is very interesting, that being warp doors. The warp doors are a form of travel in both chapters 1 and 2, letting the party travel to any door that they have previously visited, which is very useful in chapter 2 where some areas are impossible to get back to without a warp door. The last significant case of doors in Deltarune are this door that contains Spamton's shop, and this door that separates the Card Kingdom from Jevil's prison. But apart from those doors and the door that we knock on in the Light World, there aren't any other real significant doors in Deltarune. So now we can start talking about how I think each door type in Deltarune serves a very specific and unique purpose, leading to a theory I call door theory. When talking about the double doors, I mentioned the fact that they seem to be the universal entrance to the Dark Worlds, assuming that you weren't there when it was opened, considering how both the closet in the school and the computer lab in the library have double doors. Something that further supports this fact is that the computer lab originally only had one door before Chapter 2 released, where it then switched to having two doors in the more recent versions. This is some pretty big evidence that Dark Worlds are usually behind places that have double doors, leading many people to say that the hospital might have a Dark World in the future, Asgore's Flower King's shop has some double doors that could hold a Dark World, the bunker at the bottom of Hometown is probably also going to have a Dark World inside, and also other locations like Icy's and the Holiday Manor. This seems to point towards the fact that double doors are the universal entry point for Dark Worlds, but that isn't all that double doors are important for, and to show you why, we need to talk about the Great Door. I mentioned how the Great Door is correlated to the door separating the abandoned classroom and the supply closet in the school, but what is interesting is the fact that in the Light World it is only a single door, but strangely enough in the Dark World it is an ornate double door. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense as to why this door acts this way, but considering it represents an actual door that exists in the Light World, there could be a reason as to why the door is behaving in this way, that being exposure to the dark. If the door is a normal door in the Light World but acts as a double door, the only thing that could be changing it in this this way is the darkness from the Dark Fountain, changing it to be a double door in the Dark World despite that not being its true form. This acts as what I want to call the universal separator door, one that keeps two Dark Worlds or even just two rooms in the Light World separate in the Dark World. Now, I want to get into a bit of speculation on the Great Door in Castletown, because I have a feeling that we're going to see more doors just like this in Chapter 3. In Chris's house, the presumed Dark World for Chapter 3, we have many doors that are closed, keeping us from accessing them in any way, shape, or form, such as the door to the bathroom, the door to Toriel's room, and of course the door to Chris's room. These doors are all presumably shut when Chris opens the Dark Fountain, unless Chris decided to open them during the end cutscene when setting everything up for creating the Dark Fountain. But even so, we would expect to see a physical representation of these in the Dark World when going through the entire thing, possibly looking similar, if not identical, to the Great Door in Castletown. Since there are 3 different doors in Chris's house for us to see while in the Dark World, it is rather interesting as to what Toby could do with these doors, possibly making each door contain its own area. Chris and Asriel's room could be represented not only by the green room that we've seen in teasers, but also by a full area inside the Chapter 3 Dark World, and same with Toriel's room and the bathroom. But one problem with Toriel's room being a part of this is that it is always locked. We saw with the Great Door that once Ralsei closed it, it then became locked in the Light World. Not just closed shut, but completely locked. It was also impossible to travel back to the castle town through that door when Ralsei closed it in Chapter 1, meaning that whatever is behind Toriel's door might be off limits in Chapter 3, but it is possible that we will see what secrets Toriel has been hiding in that room, considering Ralsei knows a lot about how Dark Worlds work and possibly could provide a solution to the door being locked. But this is where the theory goes a little off the rails, talking about how all these doors correlate to Ralsei and his unusual abilities, and it may or may not have to do with this door from Undertale, but we'll get to that in a minute. Ralsei is stated in the game as a Dark World being in Chapter 1, and in Chapter 2 he magically seems to get from the school to the library despite being a Darkner, someone who shouldn't be able to travel through the Light World, which leaves us with 3 possibilities as to how that happened. Either A, Ralsei is a Lightner, explaining why he knows so much about the Light World. B, Ralsei is a Darkner that somehow maintains his Dark World form even after leaving a Dark Fountain, or C, some other alternative solution. Now, this part isn't entirely related to doors, so bear with me for a second as I cover Ralsei's weird behavior. Plenty of people have already speculated about the first one, claiming Ralsei is Asriel but dead, which would kind of be concerning since with the traffic jam people would have definitely seen a dead Asriel just walking through the streets, which definitely would have concerned Undyne, the police officer on active duty, while that was going on. Another common theory is that Ralsei is the red horns that Chris had when they were younger, but the major problem I see with this theory is that Ralsei explicitly does not enter Chris's inventory. Unlike Lancer and Rule's card, Ralsei stays behind when we leave the Dark World. Also, when entering the Chapter 2 Dark World, there is one speck that jumps off of Chris, meaning to represent Rule's card, meaning that Ralsei didn't get out of Chris's inventory when entering. However, it isn't impossible that Chris concealed Ralsei as an item, considering Chris literally had a knife on them at the end of Chapters 1 and 2. Option B is something that I don't really hear at all, considering the evidence we have as to how Darkners work. They shouldn't be able to maintain their Dark World form without a Dark Fountain giving them that form, but considering how Ralsei doesn't turn to stone like other Darkners when in the wrong Dark World, we know that Ralsei is different, and contains different abilities when compared to other Darkners. Ralsei also has certain knowledge of the things in the Light World, which if Ralsei was a Darkner should not be possible, leading many to believe that Ralsei has either visited the Light World or somehow has knowledge about the things outside his world. So could Ralsei maintain his Dark World form while traveling through the Light World? Possibly, but considering it isn't a popular theory and it doesn't have much evidence, there is another theory that we should probably cover, and yes, we're getting back to the doors. See, throughout Chapters 1 and 2, there are doors found everywhere called warp doors, one that allow you to teleport through space and time to the other warp doors that you've been to before. These act as a sort of universal connector to Dark World places, which is rather interesting. Each door that we have talked about, the double doors, the great door, and the warp doors, seem to have a specific function that they're linked to, being entry points, separators, or connectors in their own rights. But interestingly for the warp door, its sprite can also be found in Undertale and Papyrus and Sans house, located at the door to Sans room, which if you get into will lead you into a place that is dark, one that you can walk around in any direction until eventually Papyrus turns on the light and asks if Sans was pranking you across space and time. Considering what we know about these warp doors and what Papyrus says about pranking across space and time, it is entirely possible that this door and these doors serve very similar functions, traveling across time and space. But one thing that is interesting is that when we enter the room, it is covered in darkness, possibly a deliberate choice to foreshadow Dark World, and this links back to Ralsei traveling from the school to the library. Ralsei has hidden a lot of things in the castle from us, the player. In the first chapter, not letting us see inside at all, while in the second chapter, we weren't allowed to go upstairs. We will get to see more and more of the castle over the next few chapters, but it always seems like Ralsei is hiding certain areas from us. So what if Ralsei was hiding a warp door from us? We know that the Grand Fountain has strange properties compared to other dark fountains, and the warp doors in other fountains happen to let us teleport anywhere besides the places in our given Dark World. But with a warp door in the Grand Fountain, that may not be the case. We know Ralsei is somewhat of a prophet in Deltarune, having knowledge of things that are supposed to happen, so if Ralsei had access to a warp door in the Grand Fountain, along with visiting places he has already been, it could be within reason that he could visit places that he has yet to be. Many people speculate that Ralsei actually time travels in Deltarune, allowing him and other certain Darkeners to know about the Roaring and the things about the Light World, which if that was true, then Ralsei has already been to all the Dark Worlds throughout Deltarune, meaning that Ralsei could travel using warp doors to any place that he would need to go. But instead of it being a normal warp door, it instead creates a door wherever Ralsei needs it, similar to the teleport pads in Hyperlight Drifter. It has also been shown that Ralsei is one of the only Darkeners that can affect or use the doors that have been brought up, with the double doors in the Light World being a slight exception, but for the Great Door, Ralsei was the one that closed it, and Ralsei is the only Darkener that has gone through warp doors with Chris and Susie, making it seem like Ralsei is some sort of expert on how these doors work, especially when compared to the other characters that we've seen, so it could be that Ralsei knows how to use these doors better than anyone else, such to the point that he can travel between Dark Worlds. But for many, the entire thing is too outlandish. Travel through space and time in Deltarune doesn't seem plausible, but even still, Ralsei having a universal warp door for any Dark World would explain a whole lot. While one of the only real plot holes is we have never seen evidence for this door, but maybe we have evidence of something similar besides the warp doors, that being the Spamton and Jevil doors. These doors, though not particularly interesting when first looking at them, actually are very, very interesting. When entering the door that leads to Jevil's prison, we end up in the place which Jevil calls home. But one interesting thing is the door that we use to enter is no longer behind us, or at the very least not within our view, along with the positions of the main characters changing from a single file line to all of them lined up next to each other. This, plus what seems to be a pocket dimension inside the strange place, leads me to believe that the door we entered acted as more of a portal to this alternate dimension where we fight Jevil. Considering how we don't see any of the background or the carousel from the outside, it can be reasonably guessed that this isn't a direct continuation of the card castle, but rather a separate area that happens to be connected, similar to the properties of a wormhole or a warp door. But that isn't quite convincing enough, since it is only one example, so let's look at another example in the form of the door to Spamton's shop. This door, though not particularly fascinating at first glance, actually behaves rather strangely, since Chris is the only one that's allowed to go into the shop, and not only that, but when we go inside, it doesn't match the pile of trash on the outside. In fact, it seems like there is an infinite void of darkness behind this phone, and the wall itself is rather glitchy. This strange behavior is similar to what happened with Jevil's door, leading us to a place that doesn't continue what we would expect walking into it, almost like it warped us to a separate location. Not a part of the normal Dark World, but perhaps a place in between. But let's not get too into glitchy code and getting stuck in places in between. Basically, the connection here is that these doors allow us to go to places that seem somewhat unusual and out of place, and in the case of Jevil's door, allowing us to teleport to a place without a visible door. But even still, many of you probably doubt that Ralsei would have something similar to this because there's a lack of conclusive evidence that Ralsei contains a door allowing him to warp to places, which is fair, and considering how we only have the first 2 chapters, it is hard to know what is actually happening with some of the important aspects of Deltarune. But with chapters 3 and 4, we will gain a whole lot more knowledge as to what the world of Deltarune is like, how the characters do what they do, and of course, how it will end. Which may just debunk the majority of the theories out there, possibly including this one as well. But with that note, I do want to talk about the possibilities this theory opens up in those future chapters. In chapter 3, assuming Ralsei isn't with Chris when immediately entering the Dark World, it would more than likely show that Ralsei is or was in fact in the castle town at the start of the chapter, not with Chris in the form of some sort of object unless stated otherwise in a future chapter. With door theory, Ralsei would quickly teleport to the 3rd chapter and be able to help solve the issue of a random fountain in Chris's house. In fact, Ralsei would probably comment on the fact that the fountain appearing in Chris's house is rather odd, although it could be possible that he wouldn't, since he didn't seem to mention a whole lot about the light world counterpart of the cyber world. If Ralsei says he doesn't know much about Chris's house, then it would likely confirm that Ralsei spends his time in Castle Town, not as a hidden item with Chris, who is often at their house. However, in chapter 4, if door theory is correct, it would be an excellent time to reveal that as a fact, considering Chris and Susie being able to travel back to Castle Town to gather resources or merge items during the chapters would be extremely useful instead of having to wait to travel there until after the fountains are sealed, as well as chapter 4 probably revealing more about how the Dark Worlds work, possibly revealing the origins and also how someone discovered to form one in the first place. The church, the most likely location for chapter 4's Dark World after watching the latest trailer, is of course a place of religion, and religion in and of itself centers around explaining how the world was created as well as generally having a certain creator, similar to how dark fountains have a theme of talking about how they were created by a mysterious knight figure, and the creator of course being the said knight. So it could be a great time to explain Ralsei a bit more and how the Grand Fountain actually works. But until those chapters release, the best we can do is speculate on how everything works and wait for the big reveal. But with our door theory completely covered, it is likely that we will either get a confirmation or a full-blown debunk of it when chapters 3 and 4 arrive. And I, as well as many others, cannot wait to see what they have in store for us. Also, considering this is my 5th video ever, if you're watching this before the release of Deltarune chapters 3 and 4, then consider yourself one of the OGs. Even if you decide not to subscribe, I am extremely grateful to all of you deciding to take some time out of your day to check out my thoughts and theories about Deltarune. And speaking of the OGs, if you would like to show some extra support to the channel and have some money to spare, the new One of the OGs membership for the Epoch channel would be a great way to do so, with perks such as early access to videos, custom emotes, channel membership badges, and a shout out at the end of videos just like this one. For only $5 each month, you can help me make videos just like this one. And who knows, maybe by the time Deltarune releases, you will have grown a community here larger than any of us would have expected. That being said, feel free to check out my other theory crafting video about the problems and possible solutions for the Chapter 3 Dark Fountain, and as always, this has been Epoch, your favorite place for everything indie game related, and I will see you all in the next one.